Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Robert Lappner. I'm the Dean of the School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and it's a great honor to be able to see so many of you today and to welcome this illustrious panel. As you see from the signs on the side of the podium, this is the 75th anniversary of our school. We were founded in 1934 in the midst of the Great Depression to bring university resources to bear toward economic recovery for the city. The first programs that we launched focused on the new social welfare agencies that were developed and training programs for government officials. Over the years, the school has evolved in very interesting and important ways, always being a resource to New York and being a resource to New Yorkers who are interested in the world. Today, SCPS is the fourth largest graduate school at NYU and the fifth largest undergraduate college, as well as being known for our vast programs of continuing professional development in a variety of fields. The majority, of course, anchored in New York and drawing on the intellectual capital and expertise that come from practitioner insights framed in the context of the curricula and expectations of a research university. Perhaps our most important program in many ways in setting the precedent for what we have become is the Schack Institute of Real Estate, because it was established 42 years ago by prominent New York real estate developers keen to see the university host a place where a professional community could come together, learn from each other, share best practices, and develop an educational framework for a field that had been largely family practice. Fast forward about 20 years later, and we were authorized to offer the first master's degree in the school in real estate finance and development, which is, of course, the ancestor of the current degrees in the program. What that did was to create the validation of the practitioner voice in the context of the research university, and we've been going full blazes ever since. Today's program is especially appropriate as a 75th anniversary event, not only because of the extraordinary group of experts who are here to speak and share their expertise, but because of its topic. As many of you know, one of the leitmotifs or mottos for NYU is that we are a university in and of the city, a concept that goes back to the founding of the institution in 1834, when Jeremy Bentham, who founded the University of London, was in conversation with Albert Gallatin, whom NYU credits as its founder, about creating a place that was a focus of higher education, but serving the needs of merchant classes in the city, in and of the city. And of course, over the years, that notion has evolved into being in and of the city and of the world. And today's program, in speaking about the place of real estate, local concern, and global issues, is an apt metaphor for the evolution of our economy and our connection to the world at large. It's now my pleasure to welcome the Divisional Dean for the Schack Institute, Jim Stuckey.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert, and thank you all for attending today. I agree with Robert that this is a particularly interesting topic. Real estate has been in the forefront of many of our minds, and we are fortunate enough in our school to have about 700 graduate students and close to 8,000 students a year who participate in our continuing education classes. And we're also fortunate enough that in the spring semester of this year, our enrollment is up close to 35% from where it was in the spring a year ago. We have a number of exciting programs that we're doing at Schack. We're starting a new daytime, full-time program in real estate development in the fall, where students will be able to complete their degree in 15 months. And we're working on a number of new programs with other schools and other units within the university, ranging from the medical school to Wagner to NYU Poly and to others. So there are many, many, many exciting things going on. Today's event is part of the excitement. This is something that we refer to as our stakeholder series. And as some of you know from the last one that we had in January, we were able to have the major real estate reporters come talk about the interaction between the press and the real estate community. Today, we're fortunate enough to have some of the most significant and senior real estate executives in the profession today, representing a wide array of real estate disciplines. So let me just go through and introduce them briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ann Gilmartin, who will be our moderator today. Tricia Atallah is the founder and the principal of Vantage Point Strategy Group. It's a management advisory firm which provides strategic management, operations, turnaround and restructuring services and decision-making to decision makers who have a stake in the business and process of construction. Clients include property owners, public agencies, institutions, lenders, investors, and construction management construction companies. She's recognized as one of the leading experts in the construction industry and brings clients a global perspective as well as in-depth knowledge of the intricacies of construction, construction operations, and execution. Tricia is also the author of a well-known book for those who study at our school in the construction management area, entitled Building a Successful Construction Company, Create a Strategy, Organize Your Business, and Protect the Bottom Line, which is used as a textbook, as I said, at NYU and many other schools throughout the nation. Tricia has an MBA in Finance from NYU Stern School and a Bachelor of Science in Political Science from Tufts University. She has an international background, speaks several foreign language skills, particularly in Portuguese, Italian, French, and German. Lisa Beeson, also a member of our advisory board at SHAC, is Managing Director and Head of Global Real Estate Mergers and Acquisitions at Barclays Bank. She also sits on the firm's Fairness Opinion Committee. She joined Barclays in September '08, following the acquisition of Lehman Brothers' U.S. investment banking operations. Prior to joining Lehman Brothers, Lisa was a managing director of Morgan Stanley and Wachovia Securities. Over her 20 years of investment banking, Ms. Beeson has worked on transactions with an aggregate value of $300 billion, including $120 billion in the lodging, gaming, and real estate sectors. Ms. Beeson received her BA in Economics and International Relations from the University of Pennsylvania. Anya Brazil, Managing Director, Managing Principal at Thornton Tomasetti, and perhaps one of the best structural engineers in the country. Throughout her 30-plus years of experience, Anya Brazil has been responsible for the design and construction of high-rise offices, residential buildings, hotels, air rights projects, long-span transfer systems, hospitals, and parking garages. High on the list of her accomplishments is a role that she played as a leading structural engineering team for the design of more than 3 million square feet of high-rise office development in the Times Square area. Other notable projects include the major expansion of New York Hospital spanning the FDR Highway, the 60-story 731 Lexington Avenue mixed-use project, and Nationwide Arena in Columbus, Ohio. In 1999, Ms. Brazil was named one of New York's 100 most influential women in business by Crain's New York Business. In November 2006, she was honored as a Woman of the Year by WX, New York Women Executives in Real Estate. In addition, she was a member of the Mayor's Commission on adopting IBC as the basis for the 2008 Building Code for the City of New York. Ms. Brazil has authored numerous technical papers and lectured at universities throughout the country, including Cornell, Princeton, and Columbia. She was the first president of the Structural Engineers Association of New York and is a member of the American Concrete Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, and the Institute of Engineers in Ireland. She holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from the University College in Galway, Ireland, and a master's degree in engineering from the Imperial College of Science and Technology in London. Mary Ann Gilmartin, who's also on my advisory board and maybe one of the closest friends I have in the world. Mary Ann Gilmartin, our moderator, is the Forest City Ratner Company's Executive Vice President in charge of commercial and residential development. Mary Ann oversees the company's most visible and prestigious projects, the Barclays Center, the future home of the New Jersey, soon-to-be Brooklyn Nets, which is being designed, through a collaboration partnership between L.B. Beckert and Shop Architects, and the future component of an 8 million square foot Frank Gehry master planned for the Atlantic Yards redevelopment project. excuse me, the Frank Gehry designed Beekman residential project in Lower Manhattan, which many of you can see. It's a beautiful icon right at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, which will be the tallest residential building in the city, and the 80 DeKalb building in Brooklyn, which has 365 residential units and is the first 80-20 project to be constructed outside Manhattan. Ms. Gilmartin was chosen as the 2007 Woman of the Year by WX, New York Women Executives in Real Estate, an invitation-only association of senior-level women in the commercial real estate industry. She was named to Crain's 2007 list of New York's top 100 influential women. Ms. Gilmartin is active in many organizations and is a member of the executive committee of NYU SHAC's advisory board. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mary Ann was also one of the 40 under 40 in Crain's as well. Ronnie Hackett, also a member of our advisory board, is the managing partner and co-founder of the Claret Group. Named one of New York City's 100 most influential business by Crain's New York Business, as well as one of the 100 most important people in real estate by the New York Observer, Veronica Hackett is a co-founder and manager of the Claret Group, a New York-based real estate company that develops mixed-use properties in urban areas. Founded in 2000, the Claret Group has completed 10 high-rise buildings in New York, ranging in size from 100,000 to 320,000 square feet. Claret Capital, its investment entity, formed with Prudential Real Estate Investors, is currently developing additional New York properties, as well as office and residential properties in Washington and Los Angeles. Prior to founding of the Claret Group, Hackett spent 10 years as executive vice president of one of New York's most acclaimed office building development companies, Park Tower Realty. It's in that capacity I met Ronnie when we were trying to develop the Times Square redevelopment project. A noted leader in both New York City and national real estate community, Ms. Hackett is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including New York Women Executives in Real Estate, 2000 Women of the Year, ARU's 25th Anniversary Women of Achievement Award, and the YWCA Business Leaders Award. She has held leadership positions with a number of organizations and is a member of the executive committee of NYU SHAC's Institute Executive Advisory Board. Jennifer Stewart, Vice President of Corporate Real Estate, J.P. Morgan Chase. Jennifer recently returned to New York City to oversee J.P. Morgan Asset Management real estate portfolio, totaling 4.2 million square feet of approximately 16,000 employees worldwide. Before returning to New York with J.P. Morgan, Jennifer was located in their London office as a vice president in the EMEA region corporate real estate division. Prior to the merger of Bear Stearns & Company and J.P. Morgan, Jennifer was a managing director and part of Bear Stearns' development team for the 1.2 million square foot headquarters, which was developed at 383 Madison Avenue. Jennifer is a member of the American Institute of Architects, New York Commercial Real Estate of Women, NACRU, Urban Land Institute, and is an active member of WX, Women's Executives in Real Estate. She holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the Catholic University of America and an MS in Real Estate from NYU SHAC Institute of Real Estate, and is on the executive board of the alum. Jennifer typifies the success that many of our students have when they go through NYU SHAC's program, and it's our privilege to have her here on our panel today. Last and certainly not least, Mary Ann Tighe, who is the Chief Executive Officer of CB Richard Ellis, New York Tri-State Region. Mary Ann has been CEO of CBRE's New York Tri-State Region since 2002, a region of 2,125 employees. She began her real estate career as a broker at the Edward S. Gordon Company. Under her leadership, CBRE has become New York's prominent firm, outdistancing all competitors in market share, revenue, and margins. From the revitalization of Times Square and the rebirth of downtown to the westward expansion of Midtown's Central Business District, Mary Ann has been at the forefront of the transformation of New York skyline during her 26 years in the real estate industry. Mary Ann is a 6-time award winner of the Real Estate Board of New York's Deal of the Year Award for ingenious brokerage, among many other awards. Most significantly, Mary Ann has enjoyed unbroken long-term relationships with a number of public and private companies, and nonprofit organizations shaping and implementing their real estate strategies for large and small projects. On January 1st, 2010, Mary Ann was named chairman of the Real Estate Board of New York, the first woman to hold this position in REBNY's 113-year history and the first broker in 30 years. She is also someone who I've had the pleasure of working on 3 brokerage deals with, or 3 projects with, and is also a dear friend. So before we start, why don't we give our panel a big round of applause? Thank you. Mary Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning to everyone. I want to say thank you for inviting me to participate as moderator in the panel. I'm thrilled to be up here moderating and facilitating discussion amongst an exceptional lineup of talent in the real estate industry. And despite the unbelievable depth and breadth of the group up here, because the expertise is so wide-ranging, we did have absolute consensus on the topics of interest amongst us today. And so this morning we would like to cover a discussion on a look forward and a discussion about New York as a local business in a global context. And we'll be touching on topics related to demographics, financing, technology, sustainable design, policy and politics, and infrastructure. And I would like to keep this as fluid and as open a discussion as possible. And so I would pose a question to at least 2 panelists and encourage all of the folks up here to participate after we discuss it amongst the 2 panelists to whom I propose the question. And then after a little bit, we'll open it up for Q&A. So let me start by talking about real estate in New York. New York is a hub, as we all know, for multinational firms and international investors. It is renowned as a global business center and a cultural capital, a destination city. New York's real estate market is tied more closely to global trends than perhaps anywhere else in the rest of the United States. Trends in global urbanization indicate a shift in demographics away from westernized countries. In 2008, for the first time in history, more than half of the world's population was living in urban cities and towns. The U.S. population is projected to grow 20% by 2030, with most of the growth occurring in the southern states. By contrast, New York State is projected to have negative 1% growth. In the face of competition from rising megacities around the world, the question becomes, should we be concerned, and what will it take to keep New York competitive? I would pose this question first to Mary Ann Tighe and ask her views of New York and its prospects in competing globally around the world.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I mean, what are the odds of having 2 Mary Anns on the same panel, or same real estate panel, quite remote? New York has immediate advantages in a global competitive environment. Let me name them and dismiss them, and then let me tell you what our risks are. By the way, let me just say something about New York population. This is just parenthetically. The state is expecting a decline, but New York City is expecting an 8% growth in that same period to 2030, which is a whole other conversation, maybe for another part of this panel. Our advantages on the global stage, we start with the fact that we are the only international financial center in the dominant world economy. In the United States, we really are the only, I mean, there are many claims to this, but believe me, our competition in terms of the financial world is really London and Singapore and Frankfurt, et cetera, and Hong Kong. I think we don't worry so much about Chicago or Atlanta. So we have that. We are also a safe city, and we are, reasonably speaking, a clean city that has a reasonably good infrastructure. We have an exceptionally diverse population, and we not only are tolerant of diversity, we embrace it and consider it normal. And when you talk to people who've come here from all around the world, the thing that they will tell you is that New York is open in an extraordinary way to innovation and to different points of view. And New York has the ability to take the smallest talent, this is a whole conversation unto itself, and recognize it. You can do the most minor thing well in New York and make a huge success out of that little thing because New York rewards excellence. So, pushing those advantages to the side, because gloating won't get us anywhere today, let me tell you the things we are at risk for. Number one, we are physically an old city. In fact, one of the things that is most daunting to me is when I tour the city with companies who are based elsewhere, they talk about the fact that where are the new buildings, they ask. The average age of a building in New York City, an office building in New York City right now is 69 years of age. More than, and this year, 64% of our building stock is over 50 years of age. By the way, the national average of an office building age, US average, is 27 years of age, contrasted to our 69. Our infrastructure is old. I know we have a separate section, we're dealing with that. We have a problem in terms of the education of our population. When we talk about financial services later on, we should talk about this, because here's a statistic that can, just freeze you. Of the 5.6 million New Yorkers who are over the age of 25, 21% don't have high school diplomas. And when we come back to financial services, you'll see how extraordinarily relevant that is. And then I think one of the biggest issues for us has to do with immigration policy and the H-1B visas. H-1B visas are what allow foreign workers to come in and out of the United States and work here. We use them more than any other place in the United States. We use 21% of them in the New York region. The near closest one is 18%, which is the whole state of California. These visas, we only allow 65,000 of them a year. This is federal policy. 65,000 of them a year, with the exception of the year 2009. These visas are gone in 24 hours. They are critical for global companies to allow their workers to come in and out. We need to open this up. People think they take American jobs. I can tell you that the data shows, just one piece of data that some of you have heard me say before, Microsoft, 35% of the patents that Microsoft has registered have come from H-1B workers. We believe in New York that one of these workers creates 5 jobs in New York. So these are the areas of focus that we have to have if we're going to strengthen our competitive position in a global economy.
So Mary, let me just ask a follow-up question to the visa point. In other emerging, or actually in core markets around the United States, how does our New York policy relative to visas compare to other places?
This is actually, it's a federal program, Mary Ann. So the issue is really set at the congressional level. And our need for it is, as I say, it's the highest in the nation. But we can't seem, by the way, there used to be, I think there used to be 125,000 they allowed a year. Then somewhere in the last few years, they decided they were taking New York jobs, last 5 years, and they lowered it to 65,000. I mean, Anya Brazil can tell you. Anya, don't you bring in people on H-1B visas at Thornton Tomasetti?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big problem, actually, for the industry. Even today, when we look at our profession, we really need the talent that has the kind of background and education in engineering, because in the US, engineering schools and architectural schools are not really attracting the same numbers of people. They still are not attracting enough people to feed the industry for the future. So we've got a great need for people who have been educated in engineering practices abroad and can bring that expertise here. It's very, very difficult for us, and it's even more difficult today in the times of the economy we have. It's quite obvious that there's more concern about people taking jobs from people in the city. But if you have an area of expertise that you need to fill, that you can't fill here, that's how you use the H-1B process to get those people in.
Can I add to that? Sure, please.
I think this is a really important and critical issue that we as a city are totally at odds with many, many leaders across the country, and it's a serious issue because you've got this knee-jerk anti-immigration policy around the rest of the country, and we as a city suffer more than most people. I think the other fact about this, in addition to bringing in workers, what I think is happening in the financial services and world particularly, is that they will create the management job in London or Hong Kong because they can bring the talent there, and they know they can bring the talent. I think that's totally underestimated in all of this, and we as a city have really got to do something about the rest of the country on this immigration policy.
Hmm. Can I add to that? Sure, please.
I think this is a really important and critical issue that we as a city are totally at odds with many, many leaders across the country, and it's a serious issue because you've got this knee-jerk anti-immigration policy around the rest of the country, and we as a city have really got to do something about the rest of the country on this immigration policy.
Lisa, your work is on many levels a global perspective. Do you want to comment a little bit on the demographics and the visa situation?
Well, I can't really comment on the visas other than it does actually impact us as a financial organization, and just given all the changes that we've gone through as an industry, our ability to bring people in when we've made some very difficult decisions about downsizing has actually been limited and gets tied up in this visa issue. And so I think it is something that needs to be addressed as we are now, as an industry, trying to reposition for growth and hopefully recovery. But just from a demographic perspective, and just as I deal with investors globally, I deal with institutions all around the globe, from the Middle East to Asia, Europe, and clearly in the United States. And one of the challenges that they have is they would like to be investors in New York. New York still continues to be one of the preeminent cities, although right now what we're starting to see, just because of the cataclysmic changes we've seen in the financial world, is people are staying a little bit more local relative to their investment horizons. So you're starting to see more activity in London, but that activity in London tends to be more European or Middle Eastern based. The activity that I think you're going to see in New York, investors are interested in New York from a global perspective. The real challenge is, given all of the issues that we're facing, is how do they want to think about the long-term value in New York? And given the ability to finance, as well as the ability to kind of understand what growth opportunities exist in New York, how do they want to figure out the space needs? So, the ability to re-let a building and really being comfortable with the exit opportunities. And what does that mean? People are just moving much more slowly than they had in the past. But New York continues to be, one of the cities that everybody continues to want to invest in. So, New York and London, as you think about global investors, those are probably the two most important cities.
Great. So let me pick up on this this notion of the financial landscape and the lasting impacts that the recent economic crisis will have on the financial landscape, not just here but abroad. Lending sources have virtually disappeared. Mezzanine lending is effectively dead. Asset values have depreciated, driving projects to a near standstill. What can owners and contractors do to creatively minimize exposure to these market swings and find ways to capitalize on project development? Can companies find ways to survive these fluctuations between boom and bust cycles? And what exactly are you seeing? So why don't you talk, Lisa?
Take that first?
And then we'll have Tricia.
Clearly. I mean, I think one of the, it's common sense, but one of the lessons learned is over-leverage is not a good thing. And having interest reserves to pay for lease-up that you really don't know where it's coming from, not a really good strategy. And so I think what has really happened is the changes we've seen have really created a back-to-basics strategy in terms of fundamentals in real estate and how people need to think about opportunities. So it's frankly going to be easier prospectively for somebody to be a buyer of an asset or a repositioning of an existing asset than it is going to be on the development side. Because unless you have the certainty on the development, there's a view that we're already overbuilt from a retail perspective. There's not a need for significant development there. That I think people will be much more focused on, in-place rents going down, and what does that mean in terms of the ability to get financing. You're not going to have the dramatic lease up. It's going to be much more conservative as opposed to going from 82 to 92 in a year. And have that be the premise for the financing structure. So I think, one, you're going to have much more conservative underwriting standards, and two, what we saw is those companies that were, or developers or others who were over-levered didn't survive or are going to have trouble surviving. And so the way I think people are going to finance things prospectively, mezzanine financing is coming back, but it's really priced more like equity. as opposed to where it used to be. And I think it's just going to be a very gradual healing process. And so if I'm looking to finance a project now, I wouldn't assume I'm going to get much more than 65% leverage. It's going to be on very conservative standards as opposed to more aggressive ones. And the interest reserves and the funding requirements, the reserve requirements that people are going to expect is going to be, frankly, much greater than it has been in the past. And spec development is not really around, nor is it available because there's nobody to finance it. You know, if you build it and they will come, no longer exists.
And just for the audience, if 65% debt is the current or new world order, just give us the comparison to what it was in the height of the exuberant market.
There's a multifamily development that was sold not too long ago. You know, has a big mixed-use component here in New York. I'm not going to use the name. 92% leverage. Right.
So it's pretty dramatic.
So it's a very dramatic difference with a lot of interest reserves built in for, you know, CapEx and repositioning. I think that the days of 90% financing are over. Maybe they come back in 7 to 10 years when people forget what happened. But I think it's, frankly, a long way off.
So Trish, this sounds foreboding for development, ground-up development. And so as someone in construction, talk about what you see happening in the industry as a response to this this new world order.
Obviously, it's been a rough time for the construction industry, contractors, and architectural engineering firms, because construction is largely a local business in New York, or has been historically. So companies have built their businesses here and have ridden the ups and downs of the economic cycles. I'm a perfect example of that. I started a consulting firm in 1994 when there was nothing going on in the city. Built it up, working on public and private sector projects only in New York. Rode through various cycles and finally sold the business in 2006 after the last downturn. 2005 just about did me in. So I know how, you know, I have firsthand knowledge of the roller coaster ride that the construction industry goes through. And in 2007, there was, as you recall, a real boom going on here, and we were very euphoric about all the fantastic projects that were on the drawing boards. I heard once in the radio a city official announce that the city has finally become so economically diversified that we won't be affected by the fortunes of the financial industry anymore. I remember that very clearly. Of course, in 2008, we woke up from our dreams and realized that we are as dependent as ever on tax revenues and financing from Wall Street. So it's been, you know, this is the latest. Probably this is the worst downturn we've had in a long, long time. The construction companies are scrambling, really. They're scrambling to reposition themselves and strengthen their operations with a lot of, you know, adversity. The financing's dried up, projects are delayed or canceled. There's nothing going on in many sectors, as we all know. Public sector is the only one that's really held up in 2009. So what they are doing, or should be doing really, is number one, really scrambling to stop the bleeding in terms of reviewing their financial situation and taking action to cut costs and stabilize margins and accelerate cash inflows. And then they really are looking at implementing some kind of a stabilization plan for their company, and looking at repositioning their business in the market. I've talked to a lot of contractors in the past few months, year, about what they're doing. They're really looking very differently at how to do business in terms of identifying growth markets in their areas of expertise, acquiring new expertise, focusing on client needs, and then from there figuring out what services and products they should provide. And diversifying revenue streams, looking at doing public and private sector jobs, working outside of New York City in another region or internationally, which is something new that is a new trend in New York, which is, I think is a great thing. And diversifying funding streams in terms of where to get money to get out of this rut, in terms of maybe government programs, private investors, other schemes. Also through joint ventures and strategic alliances. I see that more than ever, that construction companies are working together. They're sharing the risk. They're enhancing their capacity as a team, which is a great thing. And they're starting to utilize innovative IT to improve operating efficiencies. And there really is great stuff out there. For the first time, there is some IT products that can really change the way business is done, even in terms of money flows. And it's so I think the industry is starting to embrace technology. And so the good news is that I see that companies are taking action, whatever action they can take, and that they are looking outward for the first time. They are looking at doing business in other countries, which is incredible for very New York-centric firms. And it is actually, for me, I think it's a great way to spread the risk in terms of diversifying the revenue streams. And the companies that are doing this, I think, are really stabilizing their situation and strengthening their financial position, which only helps New York, because they are like stabilizing agents. You know that they're not going to go out of business.
So, Tricia, you didn't mention labor unions, and I'm wondering if you can speak to whether all of the changing environment, in your view, brings any change to the labor situation in New York, and whether we'll see more project labor agreements, and what your view of that phenomenon is.
Well, we have now 4 new project labor agreements that have been concluded finally, and it is going to lead to something like $300 million in savings over the next couple of years, which will be plowed back into projects. And I think we reached a milestone here that the government and organized labor are actually working together, and I think it's hopefully a trend in the positive direction.
Great. So one of the benefits of this great panel is that we also have a real estate user group here, and so I think if it's okay, Jennifer, I'd love to ask you to address this question of how the changing landscape has affected your company, and how it views not only its real estate holdings here in New York but abroad.
Well, thank you, Mary Ann. And first of all, I'd just like to mention how honored I am to be a part of this panel, and I just want to pinch myself to be on either side of you. I'm just absolutely thrilled. So yes, as a user at JP Morgan Chase overseeing our corporate real estate, what is interesting is that you are never too far away from your office. You're 24/7. Here is your office, and you can never turn it off. That can be a negative, but also it is a positive, because no matter where you do business, albeit in New York City or London, or you're on a conference call with someone in Texas, you are easily available and able to get your job done. What we're finding at JP Morgan is that we have a plethora of real estate, and as we try to consolidate our efforts and be strategic in where we grow in certain cities, at the same time we take pause and try to think about the spaces that we occupy. I think it's important to note that how we work as an organization, typically the hierarchy of managers in offices and subordinates in cubicles, there's a bit of a shift in that dynamic. And that we want to communicate and collaborate and cooperate and work together. So often shared spaces can be a good place for us to try to focus our energies when we are actually together in a home office. To your point about how buildings are so old these days in New York City, in 69 years, that's something to be said for a 27-year-old building. That's the typical. I think that there's an opportunity for us to not take on incremental space and look for additional and build new, but rather to refocus our energies and redesign and look at the interiors and the spaces that we actually occupy. So at JP Morgan, we are still looking at shared spaces and open plan and foster an open environment so that we can share ideas and try to push forward.
And so, thank you. So, Mary Ann, when you bring foreign investors here and they look at the building stock, and it sounds like on some level they're disappointed by the aging stock, do you see the absence of ground-up development as a limiting factor? Or how does the building stock become upgraded, and how do our buildings compete internationally?
You know, it's an interesting thing. There are certain industries for whom our older buildings are, in fact, an attraction. I just had lunch yesterday at Ogilvy, whom we moved to a factory building at 11th Avenue and 46th Street. And their address is officially Ogilvy, the Chocolate Factory, 636 11th Avenue. They love the idea that they're in a building that was a chocolate factory. And so that there are industries that do find that useful. But in fact, most industries, just going back to what Jennifer was saying, are looking for openness and efficiency. They're looking for light and air. They're looking for a collection of values that many of our buildings, which are pre-World War II buildings, really don't address anymore. And, you know, maybe at another point we'll talk about, I think our marketplace here in New York is becoming even more intensely cyclical than it used to be. You know, it used to take us 4 years at a downturn to get to the bottom of the real estate cycle. We always said New York was like an aircraft carrier. I'm always bad with military analogies, but I'm much better with cosmetic analogies. But I can tell you that we used to say it takes 18 months at least for our market to turn around. Well, guess what we learned this time? Boom. We did in 9 months what it took us 3.5 years to do in the last few downturns. So my only point about this is the sweet spot of development happens now for a tighter time frame, I envision, in the future. We must be ready at the moment that the economics turn and we achieve the kind of benchmark rents that can support new construction. We need to have a city where we have fully entitled sites, by the way, with decent-sized footprints. That's a whole conversation unto itself, how to assemble sites, where we have a building department that is ready to move alongside us, and where we understand where the financing opportunities are, because one of the problems we also have is it costs so very much to build a building in New York. Maybe, you know, a big building anywhere, but certainly in New York, the prices we know are very much higher, and therefore it's more capital that has to be aggregated, which is a long-winded way of saying I don't think we're going to be awash with new construction, and it's going to be a problem for us as we go down the road.
So I'd like Ronnie to speak to that as a ground-up developer and an acquirer, what your view of the future is in your business.
Well, I actually, you know, you can't be a developer without being somewhat optimistic. You have to be optimistic. But we also have to be realistic, and there's a cycle that we just have to wait out. And I really am not sure how the economics are going to work on the office building site, on future office buildings. I think the news is good about what's happening with the labor unions these days. I mean, when you look at real estate development, we're talking about, what, 50% is labor in a project? So if you want to achieve any dramatic decrease in cost, you have really got to achieve more than just the subcontractors' margins, but real labor savings. And we have not had a history of labor unions giving back wages. And never forget that labor union leaders get elected by labor union members. So they're much more inclined and much more incentivized as union leaders to lay off people rather than give away benefits, because those are the people that are re-electing them. And union leaders get paid a whole lot more than their wage earners. But I am concerned, I mean, I'm not sure that how I see the development of office buildings, because at the height of the market, I can remember looking at a new development office building, and we needed $120 a foot on construction costs, on new numbers to make. And I've been through so many cycles. I can remember, I always had this theory that you hit a certain number and corporations find other solutions. They move, they downsize, and I think that, you know, it was always of a concern that how much volume was really at the 100+ number. Because a large user, when it begins to be such an expensive part of their operation or such a bigger number, will move. They'll rethink. They'll rethink locations. They'll rethink headquarters versus back office. I used to have her job once, so I did spend some time in the corporate real estate world on a global basis, and that's just the way corporations think. I think on the residential side, so to follow that, I mean, I'm not sure that I see when you know, to get back down to a $60 or $70 rental for office buildings, how do we get, even with substantial 20, 25, even 30% reductions in construction costs? When is that going to work?
Can I just say one thing? If new construction is now taxed at $18 to $20 a square foot, I can tell you right off how to get right back into the range.
You're right.
It's by lowering the real estate taxes, and I just want to put a plug in here. The real estate taxes this year, in New York City, this year for the first time, 50% of all tax revenues that will be raised by the city in 2010 are real estate taxes. That is $18 billion of $35 billion raised. So just to make the point here, something has to be done about taxes on new construction and the phasing in of them.
Well, I was going to talk, about residential for the moment, because I do think there's a different story on residential. There's been a dramatic drop in inventory of residential, and I think that the smart money saw the bottom, and the smart money has been buying the inventory of condos over the last 6 to 9 months. There was a huge surge. So we're down to an inventory of a little over 6,000 units. And the lack of construction financing and the inability, don't forget, the 3 major construction lenders in the country are out of business. Out of business. So the construction financing of condos is going to be even longer term. So
6,000 units are condos in Manhattan or in New York City?
In Manhattan.
Okay.
In Manhattan. That's down dramatically, and I think that's going to get absorbed pretty quickly in locations. I think that when you go down below the levels, it's very neighborhood oriented, and so it's obvious where the supply problems are, and are going to continue to be. But I think that on Mary Ann's point, the whole issue of real estate taxes. You basically, new construction without the existence in residential, without the existence of 421A, you're paying 20 to 25% of your gross revenues in real estate taxes. That just is a ratio that doesn't work and is higher than any other place in the country. So the counter argument that government officials use and housing advocates have used in the past is that it's way too expensive a subsidy for delivering affordable housing, and that it only benefits the existing landowner in the land value. So I think we have to see a rational view of land prices by current owners and some recognition over time by government that you can't tax real estate at 25% of revenues.
Ronnie, do you see development being much more mixed use then, prospectively, where it's retail, office, resi, not hotels right now, but sort of much more of a mixed-use approach to development to help defray some of the costs and have different levers to pull?
I'm involved in a major mixed-use project in LA, 1 million square feet. It took us 3 years to get, 2.5 years to get entitlement, which is a whole other contrasting issue. New York has always been the home of mixed use. I mean, when you think about it, we always had retail and residential, or retail and office. I think it's very difficult to do multiple uses. And I think that that's going to be increasingly difficult because you have the institutional capital world tends to be so focused. So office building investors, Maryann, they don't want to invest in residential. Residential investors don't want to invest in office. So, and every time you, from a design and an integration of uses, and when you get out of New York and you have to start dealing with parking and transit issues, every time you add a use, my friend Leanne Lockman always says, every time you add a use, you double the complexity.
I'd agree with that completely. I mean, when you think about it, the construction cost, if construction cost is going to be even more of a driver as the economy recovers, then we have to be really careful. I think that we're going to end up with much more single use, or, I mean, you know, the retail component is going to be constant, I think, in New York City, because partly because a lot of the zoning requires retail and it keeps the city alive. But I think that we're going to see much more single use above that retail base. And I think that also, if we're going to do anything about the cost of construction in New York City, I mean, if you look at the construction of, you know, structural frames for buildings going back to 1966, you know, the top of the sixes when they built that building, 666 Fifth Avenue. If you look at the construction photos of that, and you look at a construction photo of 11 Times, well, not 11 Times Square because that had a concrete core, but even the Times Square Tower building on 7th Avenue and 42nd Street, the technologies had not really changed in 40 to 50 years. You know, you draw something on a flat piece of paper, you hand a piece of paper, there's lots of confusion, nobody understands, because a lot of people still, I mean, you still can't explain a 3D building in 2 dimensions. I think we're going to see changes in technology. People are embracing it. I think that Tricia mentioned that a little bit. The industry is poised to embrace the new technologies, building information models, handing over a 3-dimensional model. I really and truly believe that we can cut the costs of construction if we get people in the industry to accept and embrace the new technologies and get the lawyers out of the picture. Because the lawyers...
Sorry, John. I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
The lawyers are the ones who are in the way right now. We need to make sure that we get this process moving and allow the efficiencies that occur with this process to be used in New York City.
So elsewhere, Anya, what do you see in terms of this innovation and this movement to a more 3-dimensional format for designing and constructing buildings, New York relative to everywhere else, and where is there a model for this type of collaboration and innovation?
I think the whole world is really embracing this at the same time. I don't think there's any particular country that is a leader, but you look back, it's what, 18 years since Boeing built their first 777 completely computerized using a computerized system. That's nearly 20 years ago. To think that the construction industry is still struggling with allowing the design team to release a 3-dimensional model to allow a contractor to build from it, something that could really save on the, you know, the extras, give us certainty to cost. How do we make sure that we know what the building is going to cost? You need cost certainty. And I think there's a lot of things that can help us get that cost certainty if we're willing to embrace it. I also think that the construction industry in New York, its traditional, wonderful, head-butting approach, which is, you know, claims and counterclaims. If we don't get away from that in New York and try to embrace more of a collaborative approach, I don't know if we're going to succeed in you know, eliminating these cost overruns on projects. I think that there are trends in the industry right now towards integrated project design where people really try to create a team in advance, and once you have that collaboration, you know, it would really make the lives of contractors a lot easier.
But is this the nature of the beast, or is this a New York phenomenon?
It's a New York phenomenon. 25 years ago, I used to have a project in D.C. and a project in New York, and I would travel down to D.C. and I would on a Wednesday have a meeting and back in New York on a Thursday. And the contractors down in D.C. at the time, it was a collaborative quality management approach. This is 25 years ago, 1983 or something like that. And I'd come into New York, and the approach in New York, it was effective, but it was banging the table, screaming across the table at each other and confrontational. You know, that's New Yorkers. I mean, at least you know where you stand, but it doesn't necessarily get things done effectively. So I think that there's a real need for us to work together, and maybe this downturn will make it happen.
I just want to say that, yeah, the construction industry in New York is very quirky, and the whole idea of integrated project delivery sounds great, and we have the technology to do it and all that. The problem is contractual issues, legal issues. You know, where are the boundaries? The boundaries are going to be are actually being blurred, and there's collaboration is required. So we're not there yet, because I think on the legal side, the contractual issues we're just nowhere. I mean, we've got all kinds of alternative contracts floating around that are being supported by various organizations, but we haven't really gotten to that point where we can.
I agree. To get all the way there, the contracts are not there yet, but I think that the first thing you need is a desire in the industry to make this happen, because it happens on some projects. It happens with some clients. It has to be from the top down. And if it's from the top down, it will work, because everybody participating in the team will make it happen. But, you know, I agree with you that there are some hurdles, and that's what I said, we need to get the lawyers out of the way. But I do understand that there's still hurdles to get there, but we can move it along, I think, with a new attitude, because if we don't take this opportunity in the downturn to change some of these attitudes, it will be business as usual when we start back up, and we'll still be building buildings like we were in 1966.
And when we talk about legal hurdles, other than looking at John, I think what we're really saying, and correct me if you disagree, is it really is about the responsibility and accountability associated with cost and risk and exposure, correct?
Risk
and how they manifest themselves.
Risk allocation and management and all that, yeah.
Okay. I want to go back to two things that were raised when Ronnie was speaking that I'd like to ask Mary Ann. One is as a leader of a major brokerage firm, and the second question relates to your role as the head of Rebney. So land costs, tell us what you see in terms of land costs around the city relative to the downturn, and whether there is delusional thinking still on the part of landowners, or whether there has been some correction. There's obviously a lack of activity and comparables, which make it a little bit challenging. And then as it relates to a policy matter on 421A, are there any prospects for change or an evolution of the thinking on the part of government relative to 421A?
I think in the case of land costs, you know, we saw this extraordinary spike in land costs in the last upturn. And now, alas, the number that I'm hearing from developers that they need to achieve are really so far away from where costs were. What do I mean? You know, people routinely expected that no matter what they possessed in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, for the sake of discussion, should be a number somewhere north of $400 a foot, and that was probably a fringe area, and you were looking to get, you know, upwards. Now I hear that people can't afford to build rental housing. This is what they tell me. In Manhattan, unless the number is south of $150 a foot. The reality is, nothing's getting sold. People, but I should also tell you this.
We both looked at each other and said less.
Less. By the way, that was Lenny Litwin, who doesn't finance it, saying, I can buy something for $100, who's, by the way, sort of a great man of New York real estate, probably, Lenny's, 95 this year, and has been the biggest developer of residential, his Glenwood properties. But anyway, what I was going to say to you is that nothing's trading, and the surest sign is I'm getting calls from all my hedge fund chums saying, hey, listen, I want to just buy some land and sit on it in New York. What can you find me? And the reality is there ain't nothing out there for sale right now, because there is this disconnect between where sellers and buyers are. As far as 421A, there is a dawning recognition on the part of our New York City politicians that, of course, unfortunately it happens at the state level, at New York City politicians, that they let 421A die just at the very moment where, in fact, it might have been a useful thing. I think that we'll see something new emerge. It just won't be called 421A, because that would acknowledge that a mistake had been made, and nobody seems to want to do that. So I think that there will be something that's emerging, but it hasn't emerged as of yet. And is it the end of this year? that it ends. I think it sunsets at the end of this year. So I'm not optimistic on an extension, but I think that there will be something to take its place.
Great. So let's talk about sustainable design, Anya. And actually, everybody would have, I think, something great to contribute to this discussion. So it's been a buzzword, certainly of late. And is it more than a marketing tool? And has it really changed the craft of building and construction in New York? And LEED is commonly used metric to evaluate the level of greenness. And is this a beneficial tool for the industry? And do you see it remaining as one going forward?
Well, I certainly believe that there have been tremendous strides made as a result of the U.S. Green Building Council and the LEED process. And I think that LEED has enabled a lot of education of builders, architects, owners, and everybody else to have goals and set goals for sustainability for their buildings. There obviously are some limitations. You know, anything that's built on a point system, it can be used and abused. It's at a stage where I believe that there, you know, Class A buildings in New York City, anybody, if they were building them, would want to be able to say that they are LEED certified and maybe LEED Gold or whatever at this stage. Is it a good thing? It certainly, I think it is a good thing, but is it where we're going to be in a few years? I hope it's not. I hope it will continue to develop, but I hope it's not going to be the only means of judging sustainability. I think there are a tremendous number of thoughtful developers out there who are looking more at the realities of sustainable design and what it means to them in terms of efficiency and energy efficiency and how they can improve their building stock, whether it be a new building or existing, because that's a very interesting issue that's going on. I'll just address in a moment. But definitely, I think that the thoughtful building owners and developers are looking more at increasing the energy efficiencies and bringing the issues to bear that LEED tries to accomplish but doesn't always accomplish because it's purely a rating system. The repositioning of buildings today, and we've talked a lot about the fact that there's not going to be a lot of new construction out there. I think that the repositioning and using sustainable guidelines or sustainable goals to reposition buildings is going to be quite a big issue, I believe, in New York, and is an issue already because there are some funds available and grants that people can apply for. I think that that's something that will continue to happen in the short term and in the long term, and allow the older building stock perhaps to start to compete a little bit in the market, Maryann. You know, it's such a difference, New York and the US in general, compared to any sort of sustainable goals that have you know, throughout the world. If you look at European buildings and how they consider sustainability and compare that to how we look at sustainability, I think we are still miles behind. We are playing catch up. There's a desire to catch up, and you know, the mayor's New York City 2030 is one effort to get us there, but we are certainly a long way behind. One of the things I'd ask Maryann in terms of leasing is the issues of, you know, desirability for light and air. I mean, air is one thing, but light is, in Europe, you can't build an office building like we would build with our 20 to 25,000 square foot floor plates. You can't do it because you must have natural light in all of those spaces. Do we ever see that coming to New York?
Well, I have to say that one of the most interesting things about our global city, just going back to that theme, is that more and more the executives from global companies are coming to New York. And why do our buildings seem old? I actually think it's the slab heights, how the older buildings have those low slab heights. It's the punch windows. It's the big columns. And really, what does that say at the end of the day? It's about light. And so when you can either retrofit to remedy some of that, and obviously it's the benefit of new construction, it's very well received. I should also tell you that pretty much every global company that I personally work with requires a LEED's certification for the buildings. Do you have that too, Jennifer?
Absolutely. At 270 Park Avenue, where we're retrofitting an existing building, which is an iconic building at the same time, we are achieving or going for LEED Platinum. And even though the mechanics of a point system may be somewhat antiquated or maybe not a perfect system, I think that the onus is upon us to be environmentally responsible. Yeah. And in retrofitting existing buildings, yeah, in our urban landscape.
So as a goal, Jennifer, or as a requirement? So for example, if you were to look at costs associated with achieving that level of certification on a fit-out job, is this an option still to the company, or is it a mandate that this is a direction and you must achieve a certain level of sustainable design?
I think it's the latter of the two. I think that it's a mandate. I think that you have to be not only environmentally responsible, but from a corporate standpoint as well. When you have a workforce that is to the tune of 250,000 people, you do have a responsibility to that workforce to make sure that you provide them an environmentally safe environment to work in, and also to give back to the urban landscape, and to make sure that that you're not putting your money into something that isn't going to reap the rewards 10, 20 years out. Why would you build anything that isn't sustainably correct?
Yes.
Can I add? I think that one of the things that Anya was maybe skirting on, that I think that we feel that some of us feel that what we would really like to see is not that the concept of something like LEED disappears, because it's kind of the only thing that we have in town, the only game in town, and it is a marker, and it's what people view. But I think that there have been dramatic and significant there's certainly been dramatic changes in codes themselves, and in things like the energy efficiency of appliances and the energy efficiency of windows, that we all live within we all live within building codes around the country that have taken some of these sustainable issues. That what we don't want to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when I hear you say that, what I think is what we don't want to do is to have this LEED certification process become such a bureaucracy in and of itself, because part of the cost issue of this process has been the mere cost of the application and the judging of it. And so what we'd really like to see happen is a better system, or a better refined system that becomes second nature, so that we get rid of that cost. I'd much rather take that 5% and add it into my building, into better air. Look, we're talking about 4 issues. We're talking about air quality, we're talking about water, we're talking about light, and we're talking about materials. You're hard-pressed to find bad materials in an office building today, but we've still got, a lot of ways to go in the residential building. Bamboo just doesn't do it. Bamboo is, quote, what's the correct terminology? Sustainable. But what we've really got to do in the residential field is we've really got to solve the problem of adhesives, of making those kitchen cabinets and making those bathroom cabinets. That's going to make all the difference in the world. We can have, we've done that in the office environment.
And when people look at your buildings, Ronnie, do you see the consumer, the residential consumer of real estate, be discerning about these types of factors, and whether they want to be in buildings that tout sustainable design?
I think the jury's out. I think it's mixed. I'm not convinced. I think that there is clearly, if they both cost the same, you're going to, of course. And I think that there is a generational issue, that people are aware of sustainable issues. But let's face it, we've just come through this whole cycle of luxury is bigger and better. The most successful, the most important thing we could do is build smaller. And there was still there was an element of people in luxury condos that didn't want to know about an Energy Star appliance. They wanted a Sub-Zero, so it's mixed.
And to the point about LEED and the cost of LEED, Maryanne will recall that with the New York Times building, we built that building around the time where LEED became a bit of a phenomenon, and I think it was because we had partners that were the New York Times that they could themselves elect to opt out of LEED, knowing full well that we had done all the things that we had done to make a great building, and much of it was sustainable, but they were not prepared to or interested in spending upwards of $1 million to prove that on a scorecard. And they say even today that they're proud of their building, but they do not have a scorecard to hand in, and frankly, they don't need one because they know full well, as partners in that building, what was done to create a good building. Let's just talk about energy quickly. So energy consumption, we all know, is going to be a key focus of the next 20 years. And the U.S. share of world consumption in energy is 25%. Its share of global GDP is 22%, and yet its share of the world population is 5%. In the U.S., buildings account for 39% of the energy used and 40% of raw materials. How does the United States, and in specific New York, compare with other global cities in becoming energy efficient users of energy and front runners in sustainable design? I don't know who would like to talk about this. Anya, I don't know if you...
I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, I believe that we still lag behind our counterparts in the rest of the world. I mean, the US in general does. I mean, that's largely as a result of our suburban sprawl. New York is a lot better than the rest of the country because, the urban nature and the public transportation system that we have here. But I think to really continue to cut down on our carbon footprint, I mean, one of the key issues is the expansion and the upgrades of our public transportation system to make sure that we continue to do that. That's related on the transportation side. And then on the building side, the energy efficiency of our buildings. There are new regulations, as we know, that have come out that for buildings greater than 50,000 square feet, there are regulations that New York City has brought into place where energy efficiency is becoming an important aspect, and you're going to have to, when you upgrade a building, you're going to have to meet these requirements. So there are steps being taken in the right direction towards energy efficiency, but I think that because of the economy, when these regulations came in at the end of December, there was a little bit of backtracking at the time because essentially the real estate community, all of us, really felt that this was not the time to impose very large penalties and requirements on buildings and building owners. And they backtracked a little bit and took out some of the more stringent requirements. But there still are steps being made in New York City that are more stringent than the New York State Energy Code, for example. So this is going towards the discussion of codes doing it, as Ronnie said, that the city taking on that role and codes following rather than just having to meet the standards of something like LEED. But New York City, actually, you said 39% for the country, but for New York City, in our buildings, it's 45% of the energy is in. So that's a very significant amount if we can get energy efficient buildings. And that's where I think the repositioning of a lot of existing buildings will come into play.
Let's talk about infrastructure. New York City's infrastructure, sewage, gas, water treatment systems are over 40 years old. Growing population that strains the system combined with reduced federal support over the past 2 decades will result in roughly $60 billion in repair and maintenance costs facing New York City over the next 2 decades. So Mary Ann, do you want to talk a little bit about how the industry confronts this dilemma and what can be done about it?
Yes, I absolutely do. I just want to say this to you right now. I want you all to sort of do this for me. I mean, you don't even know me, but I'm going to. Those of you who do know me, for sure, I want you to do this. Let me just say a moment about our infrastructure. I think this city has been starved of federal infrastructure dollars for quite some time. Mary Ann very charitably characterized our infrastructure. By 2030, by the end of the mayor's plan, our subway signaling system was developed before World War II. Our water tunnels were completed in 1936. The energy grid we're on was completed in the 1920s. Meanwhile, our infrastructure is key to what makes this city work. And we need to get more federal dollars. So here's what I want to say to you. Right now, I think part of this is my real estate board role, part of this is a personal campaign that actually has nothing to do with me personally, but when I see something crazy, I feel like I absolutely have to fix it. We are building a subway extension, the number 7 line. We have here, in fact, Ann Weisbrod, who is the head of Hudson Yards Development Corporation, and I can tell you what she and her organization and the city have done is fantastic, creating this line that's going all the way over to between 30th and 33rd Street where the Hudson Yards will be developed. We're opening up a whole part of the city that is going to be vital to our growth over the next number of years coming up. And the city has put together with its own precious money $2 billion of bonds that they floated, and they've done this all on their own. They've done it brilliantly so that nobody can reach in and cannibalize it and say, oh, we need this for something else right now. We're going to actually see a new subway line opening probably in 2014, Ann? Yes, but it's on its way. Okay, right now there's only one station, which is over 33rd, 34th Street area, 10th and 11th. We have the opportunity, if we go online right now, I wanted to get a desk, but Dean Stuckey's people wouldn't allow me to have a desk in the lobby. Go online, www.buildthestation.com, and just sign the petition because we need federal money. Remember the stimulus program? You remember the stimulus program and all those infrastructure dollars? Let me describe 41st and 10th Street. Shovel ready. Ann can tell you that the plans for the shell of the station exist. It's ready to be bid. Jobs. Right now, this would create over 1,000 jobs in the city if we did it. And it's green. Why do I say it's green? First of all, it's mass transit, but on top of it being mass transit, I'm sure Mary Ann Gilmartin is sorry she asked me this question. On top of it being mass transit, right now, the buildings that are there, the offices and residential buildings, operate shuttle buses. Yesterday at my Ogilvy luncheon, they were telling me that because they have in this one building 2,300 employees, they've had to increase the size of their shuttle buses to tour bus size. Do you understand that we've got these, you worry about congestion? We got these buses running all around this section of the city because people can't get to the subway. So, buildthestation.com, sign the petition. We want to get some of that infrastructure money, which we have seen hide nor hair of, except I must say at Fulton Center downtown, where, by the way, it's really money well spent. Please do this.
Do you believe that that type of a lobby attempt or effort will make a difference, and why has it been so difficult for New York to emerge with dollars?
I'm really actually finding this a fascinating journey because what do I know about any of this stuff? And honestly, I don't know if it will make a difference. I fantasize that if logical, intelligent people say to their representatives, hey, you know, in the Depression years, in the years of the WPA, New York City got $1 out of every $7 spent on infrastructure in the United States. And what did we do with it? We built LaGuardia Airport. I mean, you could go down the list of stuff that we built with the money that came to us from Washington in those years. Somehow or another, now, by the way, politicians will tell you that they gave the money to New York State, and New York State hasn't necessarily, I see Hugh there nodding his head, New York State hasn't necessarily had it cascade down to the city. Well, heads up, folks, where do you think the tax money is coming from in this state right now? Used to be in the old days, we sent money upstate, and, excuse me, downstate sent money to upstate sent money to downstate. Now downstate is feeding upstate. I also want to point out that according to the state, this year we will send Washington $55 billion more than they will send back to us. So, my only point on this is we desperately need this money, and part of it, by the way, is we've been directing it. Jerry Nadler, who, in whose district this subway station sits, is the ranking member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. And he has a project he believes deeply in, which is the Cross Harbor Freight Tunnel. I know you've all heard of that. And he's, and my only comment on it is I am sure it is a worthy project. And he also points out, by the way, very nobly, that the Erie Canal had no constituency either. And it, you know, it took DeWitt Clinton to say we're going to build this link to the West, and obviously transformational for New York. That's all of that true. what I really have to say is we deserve a better share of federal dollars, and we should be putting our federal representatives' feet to the fire and saying, send it this way. And this particular thing is a small thing. So to Mary Ann's point, I don't know if we can do it. I don't know. I simply know this. If we don't try, for sure we're not doing it. And if we succeed, we have the basis for building on something. So anyway.
So the 1 in 7 metric in the Great Depression, do you know what it is today with the stimulus money that has been dedicated, how woefully inadequate it is as a comparative measure?
You know what's so interesting? The mystery of the stimulus money. Don't we all, just before I came here this morning, I was watching Governor Rendell, who, by the way, very articulately was defending, I guess the Journal this morning had an editorial surprise saying the stimulus is like a failure. And he was saying that, in fact, if you broke the stimulus down into its component parts, and he named some astonishing number that went to infrastructure. But I've just heard that less than 20% of that money has been given out. And yet, when we ask our federal representatives, hey, give us some of that stimulus money because we have the perfect use and we can put people to work just like that and do good that will, you know, as Moynihan said, money spent on infrastructure is investment, not spending. And what do the federal officials say? We don't have any money. I can't, it is a mystery to me.
Mary Ann, just to confirm something, I think the federal stimulus money that's come to the state is about $1 billion, which isn't even, it's just not a lot to work with, right, to begin with.
So I'd like to wrap up with a final question and then maybe turn it over to the audience to ask questions of their own. Let's talk about policy. The Mayor's Plan 2030 and other local policy initiatives currently in New York City, the economic development policy of the city and the state, is it going to help and does it have the potential to have a meaningful impact on each of our roles and our perspective views of the future? What do we all think about government generally and its role or responsibility in times of downturns, and whether the government responds in a way that has a meaningful impact on recovery? Ronnie, do you want to? Give me a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. So, Mary Ann, why don't you start just in terms of your views?
I simply think, speaking in broad terms, that the government has an obligation to us, and I think that this is a mayor who has encouraged us to think long-term and to think broadly. And I think that we also have, I think, by the way, I want to point out that I think our speaker, Chris Quinn, also thinks in these terms and can lead the city council as well. I think our issues probably reside more at the state level and at the federal level.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of banking and investment, how do you see the role of government either impacting in a positive or negative way your ability to grow and thrive?
I will say that we have taken no federal money, and we have not taken any money from the UK either. We've done it all on our own.
We gave it back.
We didn't even take any. And so, look, I mean, I think that they've played an important role in stabilizing things. And I think at the end of the day, what we really need is ways to find growth to support our business in the finance world and real estate, et cetera. So we have to focus on jobs and how can we get jobs. And I think that's really basically what supports everything that we do, because if we don't have a growing economy, finance is not going to be helpful in contributing tax dollars, and you're not going to be making money in real estate either. And so I think we just have to focus on what can we be doing as a country to support job growth.
Excellent. I think that's a great wrap up and a perfect opportunity then to open it up to the audience. Don't all rush up at once. I'm sorry, how does it work? Do we want people to walk to the mic? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, real estate might be cyclical on a 10 years up, 10 years down basis. In the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of development in the outside boroughs. Chase was early at Metro Tech, and we see a lot of interest in Queens right now. What about the Bronx? And what about transportation, commuting to office spaces? It's about an average of around an hour as a prime commute in New York, and how does that impact on our ability to attract major tenants into New York, and then with the residential component as well? So it's kind of a two-part question.
You know, it's very interesting that one of the arguments about the Second Avenue subway and as an infrastructure project is that there are a lot of advocates of the Second Avenue subway that felt that the real benefit was going to be not the current nodule, which is 96th Street to 69th Street, but that the real promise and the real hope in the future was to open up the Bronx. You know, I'm not sure that I know the answer. I mean, a little bit, to me, the Bronx is a little bit like Newark. Every time it gets right on the edge of redevelopment, we get hit with a recession. But I think it's just a question of time.
I have a two-word answer for you. Kingsbridge Armory. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. What Bronx needs in order to open it up, I mean, Ronnie, everything Ronnie said, so on target. It also needs government support. So now we have this armory in the Bronx that is going to be redeveloped as a retail center. This has all just happened. And it's getting IDA, Industrial Development Authorities, bonds to do it, obviously helping it along. And along comes, I guess was it the borough president who took this position, yeah? The borough president who said, by the way, it's going to be union labor, clearly, but he wanted not just prevailing wage, but what do they call it when it's more than prevailing wage? Living wage, thank you.
Living wage.
He wanted living wage not just for the people building the armory, but he wanted it for the people working in the armory. So if you're Target and you're renting space there, you have to pay according to this wage structure. Guess what happened? Developer said, so long, and the borough president said, you know, all jobs are not alike. We only want the jobs that pay well. As a result, I can tell you that it's going to be a long time before someone decides that they want to go down the road, because I can tell you that Related, who made the valiant effort to do this with Kingsbridge Armory, spent a lot of money. I mean, our developers here can tell you what it takes to get into the game, to get to the point, and then to have somebody turn around and basically try and reinvent the cost structure, not only for people, the real estate side of it, but also for the actual users. So they've set the Bronx, I'm a girl from the Bronx, they set the Bronx way back with that move.
And I'd also say you raised Metro Tech, and if you look at what made Metro Tech possible, it really was this partnership between the public and the private sector, and it was critical mass. It's essential that there be critical mass. Obviously, transportation and issues of density, all of that go into the winning formula, and time. And it's a compression market. These markets around Manhattan are compression markets, and they rise and fall based on the health of the primary market, which is Midtown and downtown Manhattan. And so one must be mindful of all of that. But to go back to what Mary Ann pointed out earlier in this conversation, these are the very days in which these types of initiatives ought to be undertaken, because there's not a lot going on. You have a lot of bright minds available to think about the business in a way that's innovative and creative and can invest the energy to try to put these kind of plans together, but it really can't be done without the support and the understanding and appreciation of local government.
And even from the corporate sector, I remember my days from Bear Stearns and being at one Metro Tech, and now we're at 4 Metro Tech and 1 Metro Tech for JP Morgan Chase. And the incentives in order to bring the workforce out there as well, and the fact that you do have the infrastructure out there, you can move the workforce. So if you do build it, you know, they will come, and partnering up with the government and providing the incentive packages in order to make, you know, corporate companies go ahead and say, yes, we'll pull the trigger and we'll do that deal. I think that's important.
And I recall your great leader at Bear Stearns meeting with us at Metro Tech when his lease was up for renewal, and he made it very clear that this particular space could be in Calcutta for all he cared. It was all about the costs. And so not that surprises any of us now that we've watched the downfall of that particular gentleman, but the point is that it is driven in large
I'm still here.
by cost. And I think if you can't create that cost competitive environment in these locations close to the thriving sectors in the central business district, then you're not going to see the kind of attraction that businesses need to think about relocating jobs there. Swaggering, huh? What kind of question?
You talked about the need for a collaborative effort between owners, design professionals, and the contracting community in terms of trying to bring costs down, and ascribed that the whole problem was the lawyers. So, speaking on behalf of a legal constituency, what do you think that the lawyers could actually do to try and facilitate that? Or isn't that really a business discussion that's going on between the contracting community and the ownership community about what is the best way of trying to affect building at the most cost-effective basis?
How about tort reform, John?
Tort reform is a different issue. It really is a different issue. I agree with that. But in terms of the contractual arrangements...
the messenger thing where
what?
the lawyers, do you think it's a shoot the messenger?
Yeah, I'm just asking the contractual arrangements between owners and contractors, and that issue, to me, is really a business issue, and lawyers carry out kind of what the construct is, but how can they facilitate the kind of scheme that you suggest is really the way to minimize cost and make New York buildings more cost effective?
Well, I think the issue of the contractual arrangements that are trying to be put into place right now, there's a lot of negotiation going on about how these contracts would work because there's a lot of shared responsibility, right, and how you assign those levels of responsibility. I do think that the whole industry has to work together to do it. I shouldn't blame the lawyers totally. I should apologize to the lawyers in the room for that's all we wanted. But I do think that together, the industry, we need your help, because I think that what is the roadblock right now is how we structure those kinds of contractual relationships, and we are
happy to help.
Thank you.
Follow up. Now, I do think that construction management, project, integrated project delivery, whatever you call it, is all based on trust and confidence between the owner, the builder, the architects, the engineers. And I think that when that works, you could have a great building.
Perfect.
I also want to defend a little bit the New York City construction market. Builders, it's easier to build outside of New York. I think the buildings are by and large less complicated. There's more site logistics that you don't have to deal with. And productivity is a great thing outside of New York, where people seem to work harder. And that's where I think the project labor agreements could help us. But given that New York is the place where you build the most difficult buildings in the most difficult environments, and not only cutting edge, but defining the state of the art, there will be changes, there will be extras. And I think that's part of what it is to build in New York. However, you are going to, I think, see with BIM and integrated project delivery and all these new technologies that we could use, PLA agreements, productivity increases, much better construction costs. So I have a question for Veronica. With the absorption seeming to be good on residential, 6,000 units left, at what price point do you think you would go into a new development project in terms of selling in Midtown Manhattan or
in terms of condominium sales? I don't think I'd look at anything that was over $1,200 a foot.
Okay, so then if it is $1,200 a foot, I think we are getting close to the point where there will be real estate development because at land values south of 400 and great construction costs, that is a good outlook, and I'll continue to be optimistic.
And a little financing. You have to throw in a little financing.
Yeah. Well, that's true too. Lisa, will 1,200 work?
No, not on the
Frank has a contract.
Exactly.
Well, in terms of slamming the construction industry, I'm really just trying to give it a little bit of a little kick in the backside, because I think we need it. I think it's going to really help us to understand that we need to try to just change the paradigm a little bit and be, we can't continue to do things as we have done them for the last 50 years. And while we may be at the cutting edge on certain aspects in New York City, we're well behind the curve in a lot of other ways. And we need to work with the community. And I think the community is ready to work together because they have a little more time now on their hands. So maybe we can use this time effectively to actually create a structure in which we can work well and reduce the costs.
Jacob Yahya, and I teach the undergraduate capital markets class, and I'm here to defend Anya. Three things. One very important point that Mary Ann brought out. We run a family office that gets involved in international project finance and infrastructure projects. Whatever petition you're preparing, I'm actually having dinner with Secretary Ray LaHood, and I'd be happy to invite you all to that dinner at the University Club. And we have a local friend, Congressman Tim Bishop, who is also a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So we have some ears that we can champion too. Second is I'd like to invite our esteemed board in our own university, as we've been invited to write a policy paper with FERC on energy utilization. So that may be something we can work on together as we're talking about energy usage. And the third is right down to Anya's point and Tricia's point, BIM is important. The first step, and I sit on a planning board of a prominent location, which I won't name, is to get the community board and planning board members understanding what BIM is. I've had Tom, chairman of the Third Tom SETI, come and present the whole concept of BIM, and I can tell you some of our political figure types don't even understand it, let alone the industry types. So the first step is to get some kind of collaboration and just understanding the usage of BIM.
Thank you.
Tim Bishop, good idea.
Hi. This is a question I often ask. It seems that the conventional wisdom over the last few years has been that with the increase in prices of housing in the city, the rich can take care of themselves. The poor who qualify for the 20 of 80-20 will find something, and we'll do affordable housing, which again is for a very low income group. Where do we put the middle class? What do you think about that? What happens?
Well, I'll certainly jump in because of Atlantic Yards and what Atlantic Yards really means in terms of the project. It's way more than an arena. And in fact, it is the most ambitious middle-income housing project ever undertaken in this city because of its commitment to produce 2,250 units of housing, affordable housing, but not just the 20% of the 80-20 formula, but actually incomes that range in the 80 to 150% of AMI, which is where the middle class sits. And certainly people know that in New York City there is a housing crisis for that particular group of people, because if you're a fireman, a teacher, it's very difficult to find housing, particularly close to city center. And I think that when you look at a place like downtown Brooklyn and you think about the creation of 2,250 units of housing and the challenges that we've had to put that together, and it's not just the challenges associated with the litigation, it's public policy, it's the cost of building that housing. To speak to the challenges that Frank alluded to, the fact of the matter is that building high-rise, that is something over 8 stories, that can be delivered efficiently and cost-effectively with union labor in a place where you have land costs. Those are the 3 challenges: land costs, high-rise construction, and union labor. When you put the 3 of those into the mix and you try to deliver affordable housing, it is quite challenging. And that's why the government policy and the government incentives and keeping land costs to a manageable number so that a private developer would actually put that kind of housing online is essential. And so I think that you're absolutely right. It is one of the great challenges in a city like New York, is to deliver quality middle-income housing for the workforce. We call it workforce housing too. And so I share your frustration, and I actually believe that Atlantic Yards is so important because of the fact that it represents a pioneering effort to put that kind of housing online in a quantity that surpasses most anything that's been done in a dense downtown location. Anya, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I think that delivering affordable housing, and for any of us who have kids who are entry level, trying to live in this city and trying to survive without handouts from home, we're all keenly aware of it. I think there are a couple things that we need to be doing on an individual level. We need to be, on the federal level, we ought to be making sure that we're not letting our tax credits go begging, that we're taking what the state isn't using and bringing them down here and doing 80-20 financings. So I think we have to keep our eye on the federal legislation. I think locally, Maryann may want to speak to this again. I was a lender in the 70s in this city, and I went through watching bankers and investment bankers redline the city and say, you know, like Bush did, no, you know, drop dead New York. I think that we have to constantly educate our city council members about the danger of rent control and price controls and the whole issue. Then we see these things come up in legislative action to bring on price controls, and it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to this. I want to just get the landlords to, you know, return everything to rent control. One of my lines is, we don't ask restaurant owners and we don't ask food stores to subsidize food stamps as a country. If we want, as a public policy, to make housing, and I happen to be a big believer personally in affordable housing, and I think it is an appropriate use of government money, but you are going to do nothing but stifle delivery of housing if we institute the equivalent of price controls on real estate. So I think this education of our leadership is critical.
Yeah, it's such a nuanced subject, to Ronnie's point. And just a footnote, because we're in an academic environment, the Center for an Urban Future published a fantastic study last year. I don't know if anybody saw it, called something like Protecting or Supporting the Middle Class, Reviving the City of Aspiration. And they said the single biggest determinant in New York City as to whether or not you're middle class is how much you pay for your housing. And it gave a series of very specific recommendations. And it also brought home how price controls that are just a quick knee-jerk, you know, people are looking for these instant solutions. And this is one of the reasons that things are so expensive in housing, is simply because we have this system of price control that really does distort the supply-demand equation. It's a much more, that's a whole panel unto itself.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Can we, you want to talk about where the jobs are going to come from?
You've briefly mentioned what sustainability means, and the number one concern that we have globally is climate stability. And the thing that we can do is to cut our greenhouse gases, which means cutting energy. I've been asked by the governor to how New York State can cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. So that's 40 years out. That's a lifetime for me away. How can we do this? We need to address the real estate industry. We use 45% of the energy in New York City in buildings. How can we reach this target? And it's an open question to the real estate industry. How can we incentivize the real estate industry to actually meet this target?
Maryann, as the embodiment of the real estate industry, would you like to address that?
I just want to say something to you. The real estate industry in New York City, which is the only one I can speak to, is actually moving down this road. There's actually a terrific book out, forgive me again, you can tell I'm a reader, that was just published called Lessons Learned, which is about major have you seen it, major buildings in the city? I think the Environmental Defense Fund underwrote it. Major buildings in the city, including the Empire State Building, 520 Madison Avenue, and obviously new construction, One Bryant being the example in the book, what they're doing. And it's like a little cookbook. You know, here's how you do it. And if you can believe me, if you can do it at the Empire State Building, you can do it anywhere. I think that one of the things, however, that our legislators need to understand is that this is not something where you can just turn around and say to the industry, you guys pick it up. You know, there has to be a system where there's carrot involved here too, because there seems always to be this presumption that the real estate industry should just fix all of this on its own dime. And I think this book is very helpful because it lays out things that can be done, but I think it has to come together if you really want to make this happen. It has to come together with incentives that the state might be able to put in place to get owners and developers to want to play play more deeply in this realm.
I think there's
it's called Lessons Learned, and I think Environmental Defense Fund, and I think if you go on the Empire State Building website, there's probably a link to it.
I think there's a lot that's going to come out of the technology side here too, that we're talking about. You're looking out to the year 2050, And one of the things that is, I think, one of the more interesting programs out of the stimulus money is the Department of Energy's $400 million commitment. They've awarded 150, and they're about to award a second 150 for out there energy programs. And it's modeled after the Defense Department DARPA program, which is those are the guys that really invented the internet, not Al Gore. The out there R&D part of the U.S. government, ARPA, the Department of Energy, has modeled itself on that, and they're really suggesting that they expect 1 in 10 of these programs to fail, but they are really looking for game-changing technology, and office buildings and energy and light is very much in that program. And so I think we're gonna have to see some of the technology solve some of the problem as well, because owners are very self-interested. If it's going to save them money, they're going to institute it. It's what we deal with in the city of New York is this issue of whether the tenant benefits or the owner benefits. And the more we see technology innovation, I think the less that will become an issue.
I'd also like to add that you referenced 2050, so that's some time out. I think that we can also look, it's a global issue. It's not just something that's here in New York or at the state level in New York. But we can also look to other countries in the world and what they're doing, and whether it's something along the lines of solar innovation in technology will be paramount in leading that driver. But solar or wind or hydro, I think that that's something that we really need to focus on and look outside of our own backyards and really see what some of the other people are doing in the world, and they can be at the forefront. Anya also mentioned that earlier, from a Leeds perspective, there's there's BRIAM in the UK, and there are, in Europe as well, where people are just making strides, and they're leaps and bounds ahead of us from an environmental perspective. And I think that we can look to them for maybe some lessons learned as well going forward.
So the final question, I think we should not leave here today without discussing jobs or the absence of those jobs. I think every panelist should just conclude by giving us a sense of where they believe the job growth will take place in the city so that the recovery really does occur. And if we could do that quickly, and then Jim, I promise I'll stop.
I'll take a crack at that because I think the good news about the financial services industry, the job losses haven't been as bad as everybody anticipated. They've actually been half. And I'm pretty confident that Wall Street constantly reinvents itself. But and all the projections that you see around the city really don't take huge job growth from Wall Street as a major factor. The story I love is the one that Tom Friedman wrote about, one of my favorite columnists, and he quotes Rahm Emanuel as using it a lot. But when was Bill Clinton elected? 1992, right? How many years ago was that? It was 1992. He had an economic summit, I had some friends that went to this, in Little Rock before he was inaugurated. Rahm Emanuel was there, and he says the internet was barely discussed. Barely discussed. That was 20 years ago. I think that we're going to see technology explode and new ideas and new jobs around that, and classic media entertainment as much as Wall Street.
Anybody else want to contribute?
Well, I actually believe that the way the government is approaching the issues of climate change and the ability of there being some funding available, whether it be federal funding or at state level, is going to spur a little bit of that technology growth. And I see, hopefully in New York, we'll get our share of that, because that's one of the things that we really need to make sure that there's incubator places that we can actually grow this technology. But I do see that the focus on green buildings and the focus on energy and energy reducing methods is going to be something that's critical to the job growth. And I think the fact that this government is focused on that, even though it hasn't yet really shown the benefits, I think it's happening behind the scenes, and it will happen in the next several years.
So if this panel has left you wanting for more, and you have questions about all of the areas that they've talked about, whether it's financing or sustainable technologies or growth or real estate development, the answer is very simple: register for SHAC. Because we have this every day. But let me just say that I am extremely thankful to all of my friends and some of the smartest people in this industry today for taking the time out of all of your busy schedules and coming and speaking openly about the issues confronting our industry, and I thank you very much.